Well, you guys can hear me okay? We're 2 years out of what many consider to be the largest flood, particularly urban flood in U.S. history. And this photo, which has now become iconic, kind of represents that impact. 2 years, we've got about $16 billion of federal funds committed on the street. We had 250,000 structures flooded. We don't know how many cars we lost, but I've seen 500,000 to 1 million cars lost in a region which is entirely car dependent. Take it down a notch to a personal level. My 17-year-old son's best friend is still sleeping on his aunt's couch. He's in high school. Harvey was a monster storm, but more significantly, it was a tipping point in terms of innovating and policy change. And I thought about, well, why is that? Because this area isn't a stranger to flooding. One of the things we think about is the sheer size of this storm. 41,000 square miles inundated. Is anyone here from Maryland? Imagine your entire state underwater. Imagine Vermont, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts underwater combined. That's a huge storm. So the size, the geographic scope of this storm was unprecedented. The other thing was, it came on the heels for many. This was the third time in 3 years that people in their homes flooded. I meet them all the time because I live up in Houston. So it was enough is enough. It's time to make a change. And how do we do that? And something really unusual happened and changed the course of my career. The governor appointed the chancellor of Texas A&M University as the sole commissioner for this, they call it Rebuild Texas initiative. And the chancellor decided, okay, enough is enough. How are we going to make change? And instead of going out to consulting firms or other agencies and their brain trust, he turned inward to the university, to what he thought were the knowledge innovators. We also are really cheap, and so maybe that was like because we already work here, so he didn't have to pay us too much. And I was doing my thing, floating around, and I got a call from the chancellor's people, and they said, okay, we want to come talk to you. How do we do this? It's exactly what they said. How do you do it? And I'm ready. I've been doing this for 20 years. I teach graduate students. I've written hundreds of articles. I've got terabytes of data. How much time do you have? I'm ready. And my mentor stepped in, a certain brigadier general, now at University of Maryland, who's widely considered to be the godfather. I call him the godfather of flood management in the United States, last name of Galloway. He comes in and he says, "Stop, Sam. Calm down. No one's going to read this stuff." And I'm 200 pages into my 1,000-page manifesto on how you're going to do it. He's like, no one's going to read it. You got to come up with 5 points or 1 picture or map. I'm like, Jerry, you're telling me my entire life's work I got to distill down to 5 points, not even sentences? He's like, exactly, because that's the only way to make change. These people don't have time to read your academic manifestos. And we ended up doing it in 4 phrases, which set the tone for the Eye of the Storm report. I can't say that without some drama, Eye of the Storm, which somehow led to the passage of about 30 different bills passed through the state legislature to create that change. And that process, I didn't have time to really think about it, but this talk gave me the opportunity to reflect on how did we create that change, and how did this little professor at Texas A&M was able to change state policy. Well, one of the reasons I'm backed by the best research and research staff team on the planet, right? Wes Highfield, who I think somewhere in this audience, Dr. Lee, Dr. Blessing. We have the greatest team. But beyond that, we went through a very cathartic process. And I want to share it with you today. And the quote that was read in my introduction was a happy was a happy coincidence, and you'll see why in a second. So how do we innovate for change? It's going from knowledge to action. I've been stuck on the knowledge side for most of my career, thinking about the where it's flooding and how much, the why it's flooding, what triggered these massive events. The difficult part is to shift from the knowledge side, the where and why, to how you do it. And the knowledge innovators and the action innovators tend to be separated in different silos. And it was this event and this recovery that I think brought both those sides together. And I'm looking around the audience, and a lot of those sides are in the audience today coming out of Harvey. So how do you get from knowledge to action? This is where the deep thinking for me at least started. There are 4 things we need to do. They're segues. You can't just jump from knowledge to action. The first is data analytics, and many of you here are experts in the data analytics. The second is visualizing that data, increasingly more important, particularly as our computing resources and our visualization techniques continue to emerge. The third is communication. And that seems easy, right? We're just going to communicate. I think that's one of the hardest things to do. And for me at least, we have a lot to learn, a lot more work to do around the communication. And then the fourth and maybe most important thing is learning. And there are 2 types of learning. There's machine learning. So the machines are learning. It's a technical term, but it's also a general term. Our computer systems, AI, all the new techniques, that's a learning, machine learning technique. But the people are learning also. And in fact, this whole process starts and ends with people and their problems and their concerns and their values. And even as data scientists, we need to incorporate that into everything we do. So together, these 4 things act as segues from going to knowledge to action and back again to knowledge. It's a circular process. That's how it played out for us. Now, we're thinking backwards, and we didn't have time to really do this in a concerted way, but this is the way it shook out. And I think the next time this happens, because I think it's going to happen again, we'll be more prepared. Data analytics. I'm not supposed to show this map. 1 million points of loss, right? It doesn't look as big as it really is. That's 41,000 square miles. That's all of New England impacted. People can't get their minds around 1 million points of loss. So how do we analyze that data in a meaningful way? How do we go from the points to something like this? Is this the best way to do it? I don't know. Is the color ramp effective? I'm not sure, because we did this and we forgot about the learning of the people. We just didn't have time. So then we took a little more time and we started creating what we call dashboards. And dashboards is analyzing the data and visualizing it in a effective way. Again, rush for time, and I think we missed a lot of things along the way, but the team calls this dashboard 1, and this was our Harvey dashboard. It's like resilient-texas.com. And we wanted to take all the data that we produced and analyzed for the report, and that was like 400 or 500 pages. We wanted to make it an enduring, accessible data that anyone with an internet connection can access. It was really hard to do because I wanted to serve up FEMA NFIP claims and insurance policies, and fortunately Harvey was so big that we were able to aggregate this data and serve it in a way that connects with an individual. I think the future of these dashboards is customization. And so we scratch the surface. The first thing you do is you select your role. So a researcher, which may be me, wants very different data than a homeowner. Based on how you self-define, the data will be structured, presented in a particular way that makes sense. The second thing is you choose what kind of hazard impact you want to see. If it's socioeconomics or if it's floodplain boundaries, and explore the data. My 17-year-old son can work this like nobody's business, but my dad can't, who's 80 years old. And that's an important distinction as we move forward with all these complex data and visualization platforms. How do we reach multiple audiences? So we decided, well, one of the most important audiences is the decision makers. So then came Dashboard 2, and Dr. Will Mobley is the brainchild behind what if? What if we had $750 million and we wanted to find the best sites to elevate? We aggregated up to block group here, but we were looking at parcels. Could we take that data that's also in the static report, that's also floating up in the internet in a descriptive way? Can we really provide a visualization for decision makers? And that's what we did for elevation and buyouts. What if I had X amount of money? Where are the best places to focus, and how much will it cost? But more importantly, how much will it save me over the long term? That's great at the high level. Again, these are experts using this data. But the data is analyzed, it's visualized, but we still need to work on the communication. This is not the time to communicate. I took this picture, and this was right after Harvey. It's still up. It still has this sign today. This is not the time to communicate flood risk. And in this process, we started to connect with homeowners and individuals. And every time I give these talks, someone comes up and says, God, I wish I knew this before I bought my home, and now I'm stuck. What do I do? Can you help me? And so we literally decided we need an innovation that targets the homeowner, because during that critical process, the real estate transaction process, that's where the information is needed before you make that lifelong decision. And the information is either not there, it's distorted, it's this gaping hole. So we thought, well, we have all this free time after working tirelessly around the Harvey recovery. Why not just add a third visualization to the mix? We actually were working on this before Harvey, but we decided to launch a program called Buyers Beware, buyersbeware.com, W-H-E-R-E. And this was the unexpected innovation for us. A former grad student, Dr. Hamachu Grover, who's now in Washington, came to town. I bought the wine, and we stood up this program essentially, well, at the time it was Galveston and Harris counties, in a weekend, because we had the data over 15, 20 years of scientific research. We wanted to provide information as a service project to someone buying a home. My wife was looking for a home in Houston, and she found this charming 1950s ranch house that had just been renovated, new floors, new paint, got to come see it. Where is it? I'm like, wait a second, I know it's nowhere near the floodplain. She knows enough to tell me that. I'm like, God, I know this neighborhood. This is the hot spot of repetitive loss. They've flooded 3 times in 3 years. I said, honey, we can't buy this house. Well, it says never flooded per seller, and so, I don't think it's flooded before. I'm like, because someone bought it 3 months ago and they're flipping it. They did a great job, by the way, but it never flooded for them in the 3 months that they've owned it. And so rather than congratulating me and, I don't have to take out the garbage that night, she gets angry at me and she says, this is your problem, fix it. And so this is what we did. And it's basically Zillow meets risk. And the question was, why can you see your crime statistics on Trulia and your school ratings on Zillow, but you can't see your flood risk or your toxic exposure risk? And how do we do that in a way that is very simple and elegant, but backed and grounded with data? And so we created this. So we ripped off Zillow's interface because they must know what they're doing. They probably spent $100 million figuring out what drives people to look at these things. And you click on a site, you select a hazard. We had 9 hazards. And then you can get these risk scores. This is the neighborhood that my wife had me look at. And what you see here is it's nowhere near a FEMA 100-year floodplain or 500-year floodplain. But the flooding history is a red. It's the highest, worst case scenario. And that would never be communicated otherwise. This is what I think we need to be doing. I'm a professor, so I don't advertise. I don't have an advertising budget. But we had months with 30,000 new views just in Harris and Galveston counties. We then decided to spread out just to show what we could do. We did 6 more cities around the United States, and it's just scratching the surface of what we can do. The problem that we faced is we still, I think, forgot about the human learning component. We recognized the need, we analyzed the data, we visualized it, we provided this communication platform. A lot of people are looking at it, but did we really go into the communities and see is this effective? Again, we rushed to the point. It's almost an announce approach versus a learning approach. It turns out that the color red for me is a no-go, right? Red is bad, and so our green, yellow, red color ramp, to me, red is bad. I was hanging out with a geologist a couple weeks ago. Red for him is high ground. So in his world, the color red symbolizes higher elevations. Part of our research team went into a neighborhood a couple months ago, and it was discovered that the color red in some communities in Houston is a good thing. Go there. Color red is passion, and there's cultural sensitivities just around the color, much less everything else we're presenting. And that opened up a whole new world for me as a data researcher, and a need to complete that circuit and start to learn not just from the smarter, younger researchers around me, but from the clients, the stakeholders, the end users of these products that we're trying to serve, and ultimately make a more resilient situation. So I seem to have a reputation for railing against the FEMA 100-year floodplain and its ineffectiveness, and I gave, true story, I gave a talk at the National Insurance Conference in DC a couple years ago, and FEMA, I think David Alexander actually came up to me and he's like, you're so good at criticizing us, and even though you're right, how about some solutions? I'm like, okay, I'm ready. How much time do you have? And I was like, this is what we need to do. And so it led to a new project we have in recognition of the framework I just presented to try to close that loop. And it's all about better mapping, measuring, mapping, and communicating, in this case, urban flood risk in a way that's never been done before. It's a collaborative project between FEMA, the National Academies, the General Land Office, and Texas A&M and the Center for Texas Beaches and Shores. And it's the whole project, so now I have to be practiced at distilling incredible amounts of information in a picture, and I've had some help. This is the whole project. It's about the left side, the visualization comes out of the data analysis and data analytics. Moving clockwise, it's about engagement and learning from the communities and incorporating that feedback back into the statistical models and the data analytics. It's completing the circuit. And up until that point, my circuit was broken. Of all the things we've done as a team, I think we've never really completed the circuit, and it's really hard and time-consuming and expensive. But this is how it works. This is a community, Greens Point, north of Houston. So we have these focal communities. And the first thing we do is the data analytics. So here's thousands of points of loss in this little community. And we ask the machines to learn. And so we put this in a statistical, artificial intelligence, machine learning environment, and we go from all these confusing points to something that looks like this. And this is the work of Dr. Will Mobley and others who can take millions of points and render a risk, a surface of risk, not a dichotomous line, not 100-year or nothing, or 500-year or nothing, but a gradiated surface of risk. So the computers are learning, and we've got this wonderful representation driven by data analytics. We're visualizing, and now we're ready to communicate. And you can see when we put on the FEMA 100-year and 500-year floodplains, there's a lot of overlap, but you'll see some blue areas. You'll see some blue areas to the bottom right that our maps capture that the FEMA maps don't. Terrific. But again, the circuit's not complete. We walked into, and I wasn't there, Ryan Eddings walked into a meeting with a map, this map, and said, of local stakeholders, tell me why this is wrong. And the local stakeholders marked up this map and said, okay, you're good here, but there's something happened over here that no model caught. And then we can take that information and we can fold that back into and recalibrate our statistical and data analytical models and then go back again. And along the way, we can ask, does this color ramp make sense? Is this an effective map? Can you use this? There's this whole emerging field called, I've learned last week, human-centered design. We need to be doing that in our geospatial data analytical platforms. So it kind of renders this, it's a process of innovating change. I'm just going to summarize here. And these slides were made by Dr. Russell Blessing, who's leading this project. The data collection, right? So they're different data. We're going to put that into a funnel. We're going to model it. We're all good at that. Like, that's how we were trained. Then we're going to visualize it. How do we visualize? And that's where we need to get the input of local stakeholders and people. And there's buyers beware, and there's other renditions. Those are parcels I'm not supposed to show. That's the work of Dr. Sebastian. How do we visualize it in a meaningful way? And it's going to be different for a emergency manager versus a senior homeowner. And then we go in and we engage. And this is where it's time consuming. You can't do the whole state at a time. I witnessed the Commissioner Rebuild Texas team. I wasn't part of the actual workshopping and engagement, but they went all over the state. It was amazing, the effort and the enthusiasm and the concern they showed. But they couldn't cover 22 million people, right? So that's where we need to focus. We measure their perceptions. We go back to the visualization, and all of that is meant to lead to better risk reduction strategies. That's the process. But again, we've just scratched the surface. If we really want to innovate change, we've got to take the next step. And there are two things we need to do. I did not see this coming, but they told us, you go come up with the best recommendations you can coming out of Harvey, and they actually went through the legislative process. One of those things was the Institute for Disaster Resilient Texas. This is not your basic academic institute where you just count people up and you meet and you talk to each other and you declare victory. This is an analytical top that spins off tools, strategies, solutions to serve the state in becoming more resilient. This is what we've been doing for the last 10 years in a more formalized process. And we've been asked to spin that up. It's going to be a Galveston-based institute, but it's going to operate and behave at a system and statewide level. And for all of you in Texas, that are here today, we need your support to do this. It's formalizing this haphazard process that I'm now recasting for you in a more effective way. At the heart of the Institute, then, this analytical top is what we're calling the Disaster Information System. So all the little dashboards that I showed you, all the little scratching at the surface, we had unreasonable time frames, like 6 months to do everything I just showed you, pretty much, maybe less. we need to bring that together in an integrated whole. There's no reason with the technology and the visualization capabilities and the resources that we can't have an integrated system at a state level that gives country immediate damage estimates, that gives a homeowner their risk profile, that has a common database that then serves in different ways to different stakeholders, concerted information that leads to behavioral change and more resilient actions. Again, for those in Texas and anywhere else, we need your help to do that, but I think now is the time. We've crossed that tipping point of Harvey, and now I'm just waiting for the next storm. We got a pretty sizable one a couple weeks ago, Tropical Storm Melda. But I really feel a sense of urgency that we need to start thinking more integrated. We need to deploy all the knowledge and the analytics and the learning that starts and ends with people into one system that can effectively move the state forward and serve as a model for other states. There are other states that have started to do this, North Carolina, Iowa, and other states. I think Texas is the best place to really do it and do it well. So that's the end of my talk. Thank you so much for coming again. I hope the next couple of days are super productive, and I'll be floating around in and out if anyone needs to talk to me or has any great ideas that we can work together on. Thank you. Sure, okay.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Brody. So we do have time for a couple of questions and answers, and we got a couple of folks with microphones in the back. So it looks like, Charlotte, we have a question with TJ right up here in the white shirt.
Thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation, Doctor.
Thank you.
Very eye-opening in terms of taking knowledge and turn it into something you can act on and make decisions on. So where in that process do you deal with such things as community development, improvements in stormwater systems? You talked about perhaps, if I understood it correctly, perhaps the state purchasing some property and then raising it up, and that impacts everybody else. So how does that get measured, and how do you use that to update what you anticipate for the area's characteristics in terms of where the water goes, where it flows, where it backs up, so forth?
I have a planning background, so all of our research is focused on the role of the human-built environment. So impervious surfaces, roadways, rooftops, Walmart parking lots. It turns out sound walls have become important. In low-lying landscapes like the Houston region, inches matter, so elevating structures is a big deal. Purchasing properties and protecting them, particularly around naturally occurring wetlands, is important. As researchers, and Dr. Highfield has been a partner in all of this research for the last 10 years, we're great at it. Well, we're doing it. I won't say we're great at it. As practitioners, though, it's really hard to bake that into management and strategy, because the rubber hits the road around these issues at the local level, but these are watershed scale issues. And if we don't think about the watershed scale, we're going to come up with the wrong answer. And Harvey and other storms like it, they almost expose these underlying problems. You know, they emerge because there's so much water. And this upstream, downstream issue really became pronounced in different ways. And so you've got, vector and velocity of water going into these channels or going towards the channel and flooding along the way, and then going downstream and flooding downstream communities, which is a function of our interest in conveyance, get the water out, which was great back in the 1800s when the next stop was the Bay. But now, if you're in Katy, you get the water out, the next stop is Houston. One of the things but the discussion is there, and one of the things that the chancellor said, "You go crazy, Sam. You come up with the best damn flood plan, and we'll sell it." I don't know if you met the chancellor, but verbatim is what he said. And so we started pitching these watershed management strategies, and it got passed. And the Water Board of Texas is now charged, my apologies, with implementing this watershed-based initiative, which deals with development and that upstream, downstream issues. So I think it's going to have to play out, but ultimately it's got to be embedded into the local development frameworks. That's really hard to do in places like Houston and other areas where development rules and, we'll develop now and ask questions later. But I think that's changing, and you can see it by the discussion, you can see it through the state laws, it just has to trickle down to the local level.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
With emergency management in Texas falling under the system now, do you see an opportunity for additional evidence-based knowledge to be transferred into action as you progress forward?
I do, and again, I did not see this coming in my own career. Nim Kidd, who's now a vice chancellor, and he's head of the emergency management division, he is working so hard to reach out to not just me, but hundreds of researchers around at A&M and around the entire state, the whole system, and UT as well. We'll let UT come as well. In a genuine way that I didn't think would happen. And not only that, but him and others are enabling researchers like us to be part of the discussion. And I think the chancellor kicked this whole thing off. Like, I was in the room where he's like, you know what, we got people right here, and maybe because we're free, but even so, let's use what we have. And it created this whole new culture and process of engaging the folks that have been sitting around worrying about this for 20 years. I remember as a young lad, when I first got to A&M as an assistant professor, Katrina it was the heels of Katrina, and I was at the Hazard Center, and the researchers there were just devastated at what happened with Katrina. I mean, I was worried about their mental health. Mike Lindell was one of them. He was heading the Hazard Center. And I realized because they had spent their careers predicting that this would happen and shouting into the darkness. There was never a spotlight put on them. And so when it happened, they were just demoralized, briefly, but it really had an impact on me. And when in this process, it was different, where all of a sudden the people shouting into the darkness were in the spotlight, and I think that led to real meaningful change. And I hope that as the state moves forward with that same approach, the outcome's going to be much more effective, and we're going to lead to more resilient behavior. But we're going to get more storms and more droughts and more fires. And so we need to keep that in our mindset, that we're just waiting for the next big disaster to happen.
I think we have another question right here.
Doctor, from the because you had so much more data to work with in that urban environment, you got a lot more information to analyze. Did you come up with a schema to say that this impact is better for mitigation complete removal structures versus raising structures versus some kind of infrastructure protection or infrastructure upgrade? And did you come up with a formula that can be replicated in other scenarios?
We did. Again, we only had 6 months, so we focused on 2 main mitigation techniques. It was elevating structures and buyouts. People come out, this is the answer, this is the answer. There's no one answer. It's going to be a collection of different strategies working synergistically. And so we wanted to start thinking about how can we at least take 2 of them, the 2 main ones, recognizing that there's hundreds of others that need to be analyzed in concert. There's this super smart guy, Dr. Will Mobley, and Coyote Atoba. They're now postdocs and research scientists. They made this happen, and that dashboard 2 is how we did it, where you can choose a mitigation strategy, you can choose a budget, because it's all about the economics, and they'll systematically optimize and find the best spots. And that came out of this discussion where we're just reacting, and it's haphazard. We need to be more proactive and concerted in how we choose these sites for mitigation. What we didn't get to is public infrastructure. We didn't get to other strategies. I think, and I always have to bring this up in my talk, little things like sweeping the street drains is one of my pet peeves. I think that could save hundreds of millions of dollars a year if we just had an education campaign for people to go outside and sweep their street drains before the rain. I see it happen all over Houston and Texas. And so again, this was meant to be kind of a demo, We're scratching the surface, and we need to do more. But the data's there, the data capabilities are there, the visualization is there. Another thing I've learned is with those million points of loss, when we ask the machines to learn, again, I point back to the research team around me, which is the best on the planet. Actually, Dr. Mobley is sitting back there, so he's the brains behind a lot of this stuff, so you can go hoard him after the talk. Once the computers learn, we don't need the data necessarily because it's been trained, and you can go out to other areas where it's not data rich, or it's not Harris County, they've got $1 billion to do stuff. And we can apply that learning to other rural areas, less capacity jurisdictions. And I think that's also where a lot of the magic lies, which is why I focused a lot of my talk on the machine learning, not to ignore the human learning that takes place around that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brody. Any burning questions? I think we have time for one more question. So I think there's one right here in the middle. Charlotte's passing you a microphone.
Dr. Brody, we're a home rule state. And so, I sit in workshops with local leaders, county leaders, and they say, I don't have the tools to even keep people from building in the floodway. Like, what are we going to do? I know it's a very broad question, and I'm just kind of asking, can you paint us a vision for how we can fix Texas?
Yeah, so probably not to your satisfaction, because that's a fundamental problem. That neighborhood, Greens Point, a lot of those dots are because we built in the floodway. And we're still building in the floodway, and that just seems crazy to me. The broad vision is this. This is what I tell my students, because I get this question in my classes. There are two ways to create change. We can regulate, or we can educate. And I think the education is probably going to be, it's slower, but the most profound way to prevent people from building in the floodway. It's a buyer's beware system where if that information is transparent, nobody's going to want to buy or live in the floodway because they know they're going to flood and they're at risk. Even if they move from the Midwest or Colorado and they've never experienced a flood, it's there. And that knowledge, that education, over time, I think, and maybe I'm optimistic, people will choose themselves, opt out of those locations. And the developers will have to find someplace else to go. The regulation is super contentious, although it's kind of a no-brainer not to build in the floodway anymore. But it's the education, and that's why we did buyers beware, to create that slow onset change. And I think we need more of that, and that's why the data analytics, the visualization, the communication and learning all need to come together in an integrated system under this institute entity, hopefully, and make that change. It's going to take time, though. What we have now is a lot of money. And my FEMA friends at headquarters, use it now because this is probably not going to happen again. This was also a tipping point for, we're not going to give you $16 billion anymore because we just don't have it. And the next storm could be right around the corner. So better to use the resources we have now. There's a lot of money out there to do a lot of good. Use it now because the next Harvey or Sandy or Katrina, we may not see that kind of recovery and resources.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Brody. I appreciate it. And just so everyone knows, Dr. Brody will be with us over the next 2 days, so feel free to grab him and continue the good conversation. This is a great kickoff and the emphasis on mitigation and the innovation that you've worked on. So thank you so much.